Welcome to today's webinar on incentivizing large-scale CCS in Canada. I think we'll get going now. I hope that everyone and their families and your colleagues are all in good health, given the circumstances that we are under globally. And so glad that you could join us today. My name is Jody Woolham. I am the head of Communications and Media Relations at the International CCS Knowledge Center, and I am the moderator for today's webinar. I will be making a few opening remarks, and then I will introduce Beth and Alex, and they will then walk us through the details of today's topic. And then hopefully there's going to be time, and we will really welcome some questions and do a bit of a Q&A. I do ask, however, that you try to type your questions into the Q&A box that's on your screen, and I'll moderate from there. All right, so shall we get started? Right. So with Canada's foresight to have made decisions to invest in large-scale CCS, it is globally known as a pioneer in understanding clean technology and its potential for generating substantial emission reductions. The early mover projects in Canada not only assumed the risk and the costs associated with the learning curve seen by first out of the gate projects, they are continuing to contribute valuable global leadership based on their gained experience in operations and subsequent lessons learned. While advances towards second generation CCS do show that there's a potential for a sharp decline in operating costs, there still remains for many regions and industries a need for kickstart incentives to ensure that opportunities to use CCS to reduce those large amounts of emissions are maximized. The global economy has been hit hard by the pandemic, and Canada feels the impact of that economic downturn. In its recent speech from the throne, Canada signaled a number of additional measures intended to tackle the coronavirus and provide income support to Canadians during the pandemic. It also looks post-pandemic, indicating measures intended to facilitate Canada's transition to a lower carbon economy and infrastructure spending. Prioritizing investments to improve Canada's productivity will become increasingly important, and hence today's discussion. The International CCS Knowledge Center and RSM Canada have partnered on this white paper on CCS incentive options for Canada to help facilitate a discussion regarding CCS and its role in Canada's economy, because the breadth and experience of each organization respectively. In addition to improving productivity and lowering Canada's GHG emissions, CCS can play an important role in supporting regional economic development, improving the competitiveness of Canada's energy and other sectors, and support small and medium-sized businesses. Today's webinar will provide an overview of the white paper, which highlights pathways in the Canadian tax system that may open doors for industry to have a kickstart CCS support, increasing deployment of CCS while aligning with the continued development of the Pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change. So now let me tell you about the International CCS Knowledge Center. It is an organization dedicated to advancing the understanding and use of large-scale CCS as a means of managing GHG emissions. The Knowledge Center is unique in that it houses the experts who were instrumental in the development and operation of Boundary Dam 3 CCS facility. Understanding the full chain realities and complexities of a deployed world-leading project, the Knowledge Center offers insights into practical deployment considerations. The Knowledge Center places a high value on information and expertise that is then permitted to be broadly shared with multiple parties. This promotes research, innovation, and deployment by reducing the cost and risks associated with new CCS projects domestically and around the world. Beth Valiaho is the president of Strategy and Stakeholder Relations at the Knowledge Center. And Beth leads the considerations of policies and regulations that foster CCS and focuses on helping to link CCS knowledge with other countries, to reduce lock-in investments, and to collaboratively support the goals of the Paris Agreement. Her understanding of complex climate change matters, capacity building requirements, and international financing concerns act as a solid basis for assisting both national and international implementation strategies for technologies and support environmental targets. Welcome, Beth. Now let me tell you a little bit about RSM. RSM Canada provides public accounting services and is the Canadian member of RSM International, a global network of independent audit, tax, and consulting firms with more than 43,000 people in over 120 countries. Their team comprises 69 partners and over 600 people nationally in 4 office locations spanning Ontario and Alberta. RSM serves clients in various industries, including finance and insurance, energy and oil and gas, manufacturing, private equity, real estate and construction, technology, business and professional services, and government, healthcare, and education. Alex Kotsopoulos is a partner in RSM's consulting group and leads the economics and social impact practice. He advises companies, governments, regulators, and national and international institutions on broad economic topics on a macro and an industry basis, helping them assess, evaluate, and prioritize investments, initiatives, and strategies. Alex specializes in cost-benefit assessments and project evaluation, economic impact assessments, market and industry analysis, demand and revenue forecasting, and strategic planning. Welcome, Alex. And with that, Alex and Beth, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jody. And thank you everybody for being here and tuning in to our webinar on our new white paper on incenting large-scale CCS in Canada specifically. I was fortunate enough to be involved in helping the United States to look in the Senator's staff to look at the 45Q bill in Washington, D.C. And I was very fortunate to have access to those staffers and figure out how a new tax bill in the United States is incenting carbon capture. And we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. Also, thank you, Jody, for promoting me to the job of president of my organization. I'm, in fact, the vice president, but I will take it for this webinar. Again, thank you so much for being here. You know, webinars are interesting, fun. We've been on so many of them, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here for this. So I want to talk first about why CCS is needed in Canada and the current status of climate change. I'll walk you through the beginning of the report, talking about climate change, the perception globally, talking about a little bit how CCS works, as well as the current status of CCS in Canada. Alex will talk a little bit more about you know, what we started to find when we looked into what the appropriate tax system approaches would be in Canada, as well as the economic impacts. And then we'll answer a bunch of questions at the end as well. So we'll make time for that. This topic is becoming more and more important. You know, one of my new key message lines, I think, is you can't get to net zero starting from ground zero. And the know-how and knowledge that Canada has on CCS is absolutely invaluable. So because we have people from all over the world, I'm going to go into a little bit about Canada first, just for everybody's sake. You know, Canada has a 30% reduction in GHG target below 2005 levels. That would take them to around 511 million tons a year by 2030. It's also announced that it has a target to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Things like nature-based solutions and carbon capture and storage, including direct air capture, are going to be, you know, super important in order for us to balance out and have a net balance on our emissions, both domestically and internationally. Canada's Pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change is built on 4 pillars as a result. You know, there's pricing carbon pollution, different complementary actions to reduce emissions across the economy, adaptation and climate resilience, which is always key, and then clean technology, innovation, and jobs. That's where we find ourselves often hanging out in that space. But, you know, in order to get to that net zero target, as I mentioned, clean electricity generation, greener buildings and communities, electrification of transportation, and nature-based climate solutions are all going to be part of the mix. And what I really want to let you know is that at the International CCS Knowledge Center, while we advocate for CCS and see it as a critical tool, We know that it is one of the many tools in the toolbox that we have to use. We need everything in order to meet these types of commitments. And so Canada's climate target is ambitious. And in order to achieve those emission reductions, of that magnitude, there needs to be accelerated progress in the commercial scale deployment of CCS across a wide variety of applications. That includes power generation. Boundary dam coal is happening. We're also going to see, when there's a shift from coal to natural gas, there's going to then need to be CCS on natural gas considered. Industrial processes like cement and steel and fossil fuel produced hydrogen. Including bioenergy production and looking at how we can get negative emissions from bioenergy carbon capture and storage is something that I think Canada has the ability to do more and more of. You can read more about bioenergy CCS on our website, and I think it'll be a topic that we'll look at more because Japan, the UK, different places are actually looking at Canadian forestry products and sustainable residues to burn and then capture the emissions to get below zero. So Canada's fourth biennial report, the reports that all the states, parties to the Paris Agreement provide to the United Nations, it really lists core climate mitigation measures for both federal and provincial governments. And CCS is actually recognized as one of the measures offering the most significant impact on sectoral GHG emissions and estimated mitigation impacts for the next decade. Next slide, Mandy. So also, I want to now talk to you a little bit about CCS and how climate change mitigation works. So we're very fortunate at the International CCS Knowledge Center to be able to go around the world and share the information that we have learned and that we're generating as we progress. And that know-how, I think, is quite invaluable, as I mentioned. The International Energy Agency recently came out with their Energy Technology Perspectives report, and they had a special summary report on carbon capture and storage. The chart on your screen actually reflects the growth in global CO2 capture by source and period in the sustainable development scenario that they looked at. So we know that Canada wants to reduce its emissions, but before we go into the current status of CCS in Canada, I wanted to talk you through what the world is saying about CCS and its role in the mix of technologies required to meet the targets. Coupled with all of the other clean solutions, the large impact CCS can have spans global mitigation outlooks. And in fact, a sense of growing urgency is being felt. There's an increased interest that we're seeing across energy and industrial sectors globally for the expansion of large-scale CCS activities. And that's no different in Canada. With post-COVID economic stimulus being directed towards clean development considerations and climate action, CCS is an active part of the conversation for those net zero ambitions, as I mentioned. So the IPCC's fifth assessment report, people say, oh, the cost of CCS is so expensive, but the IPCC says that the cost of climate mitigation will increase 138% without the application of CCS technologies. That's just to get to 2 degrees. Technical experts around the globe agree that CCS can support an economically sustainable route to deep emissions cuts, and it's a required technology to achieve those mid-century targets. So, what the International Energy Agency is now coming out and saying in their recent report in September is that CCS aligns with the goals. So the sustainable development scenario is actually aligning with Paris Agreement temperature goals. And the report shows that in the next 10 years, global CCS deployment must increase by a factor of 20. Focusing on retrofitting existing power plants and factories to capture over 800 million tons by 2030. That's a lot when you think that Boundary Dam and Petra Nova have the capacity to capture 2.4 million tons, and that's in the power sector retrofits alone. So there's a lot to go forward here. That's going to require large increases in investment in the near term to ensure that deployment later in the decade. Out to 2070, the IEA's same sustainable development scenario, I know that sounds like a far away into the future, but it's requiring 85% more CO2 being captured. That's over 10 billion tons being captured from CO2 and 90% of it being stored. Only 8% of that is noted to be used in other applications. So this is something that we know. And also what's really important to know is that a faster innovation case, so like if we want to get to net zero by 2050, the IEA is saying that we need even more CCS in the energy mix, including bioenergy and direct air capture. And Canada has not only in bioenergy a great opportunity there, but with companies like Carbon Engineering really making leaps and bounds in the area of direct air capture. You know, that net zero 2050 commitment would require 8 billion tons to be captured in the time frame to 2050 and storing 200 times more than we currently store. You know, so Canada has been a leader in CCS, but we're hearing from, you know, Minister Nixon in Alberta, Minister O'Regan of Natural Resources Canada, CCS is necessary to meet climate change commitments. So Mandy, if you could go to the next slide, please. So I want to just do a basic overview of CCS. I know that, you know, we have people from around the world wanting to understand Canada's climate commitments. We want to have people from Canada understanding the global outlook on CCS. And then we've also got financiers and investors and, you know, accountants on the line, which is a beautiful mix of people. I'm so happy to see so many different subsets of people interested in this topic. So in that instance, I'm going to just do a brief overview of CCS. I know most of you know about it. So basically, you know, you capture the CO2 off of an industrial source, you compress it, and it goes into a liquid-like state. It gets put underneath the ground. At Boundary Dam, we have actually the option to sell it for enhanced oil recovery, which is, I'll tell you about a little bit more in a second, but also we can compress it and store it in a deep saline reservoir. This is completely measured, monitored, verified. You know, this is also demonstrated at Alberta's Quest project. They've ensured that CO2 remains safely and permanently stored. You know, there's comprehensive, sophisticated monitoring systems at the Quest storage site, for instance, that maintain multiple levels of measurement, monitoring, verification over the lifetime of the project to confirm that that CO2 is remaining contained. That's one of the questions we often get from different public concerns. So, you know, it's important to note, as I mentioned before, that the quantities of CO2 being captured from these large-scale processes, you know, other utilizations of CO2, while able to spur demand for CO2 and create a marketplace, which is very important, you know, they're not going to be sufficiently able to permanently remove all the CO2 from these high-emitting processes from entering the atmosphere. And as the IEA mentioned, you know, that permanent sequestration is really necessary. And we're very fortunate in Canada because the opportunities for sequestration and enhanced oil recovery in Canada are considered some of the best in the world. You know, I believe that PCOR, they have a map showing the storage availability, and in Alberta alone, I think there's 80 billion tons of available storage in just Alberta. Don't quote me on that, that's from my brain. We're going to have something coming up from the International CCS Knowledge Center on that in the new year. But I just want to talk about the Weyburn oil field for a second. That's here in Saskatchewan. It actually has sequestered over 35 million tons of CO2 in the 2 decades that it's been doing enhanced oil recovery. It's generated 104 million barrels of incremental production of oil to date, and that adds value to the oil field resource, as well as royalties and all those things that stem from that. Allowing the oil wells to use the CO2 to maximize their production in this cleaner fashion, it's actually less emissions than traditional extraction, and that's a smart solution in the Western provinces. So critically for Canada's oil production and its related emissions, the life cycle analysis, which includes the impacts of, you know, potential increase in oil consumption. People are often concerned, well, you're producing more oil. You know, it actually shows that enhanced oil recovery results in a 37% reduction in CO2 emissions per barrel of oil produced as compared to conventional oil production. And that comes from the Clean Air Task Force in the United States. We also see 30% less greenhouse gas emissions from that extraction. So it is a very novel way to get CO2 out of the ground but it also continues the life of wells that may be declining in production. Next slide, Mandy. So I'm not going to stay here on this slide too long. I just really wanted to talk about the current state of CCS in Canada, large scale. Canada is doing a lot of things, and a lot of fantastically innovative things in the R&D space for CCS, as well as in the conversion and utilization other than EOR space. But there are some large scale projects in Canada that I really want to draw your attention to, because there are not that many large-scale CCS projects in the world, and Canada has been a leader in CCS. So this chart kind of shows you, and it might be hard to see, so I ask you to actually go to our report online to look at it more. But what all these Skittles colors of blocks are meaning is that, you know, there has been a lot of investments in CCS projects for 4 fundamental project, large-scale CCS projects in Canada. Now, the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line, you could consider 2 anchor capture projects with a pipeline and a enhanced oil recovery, with the opportunity to have a trunk line that has more sources and sinks coming online. I'll get a little bit to that in a moment, but what I really want you to tell you to take from this slide is the investments as it relates to deployment, because that's what we're talking about today, investments and incenting CCS deployment. So all of these projects happen through government grants and some industry support, both federally and provincial grants. So there looks like there has been a steady CCS progress when you look at all of what's happening there. But in fact, there's a noticeable gap in deployment between the Boundary Dam and Quest project and the ACTL project. And then the investments that are starting to be triggered, we're not seeing a lot of them for the deployment of any more large-scale projects in the near term. They're not popping up on that investment timeline yet. I do suspect that we will hopefully see some in the near future. And this, of course, doesn't include Capital Power's investments, for instance, for their carbon nanotubes and that utilization. More so looking at those large million-ton or over 400,000-ton investments. This also doesn't include a recent announcement by, last fall announcement by Emission Reductions Alberta, for instance, for a feasibility study for a cement plant in Edmonton. These are actually the feed, like further down the line studies. So if you look to the investment timeline, that there was quite some time between government grants and the initial startup of projects as well. So this relates to the fact that the government dollars saw the projects gaining certainty with engineering and design studies, and it creates certainty for the decision makers around costs, contracts, and other deployment considerations. These are not research studies, they are part of that path to deployment. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it's important that more dollars are accessible to projects that are not shovel ready, because that's becoming a very important topic with COVID and economic stimulus, and we look to shovel-ready projects. We're suggesting that this path to deployment be considered a necessary shovel-ready step that warrants some monetary considerations right now as well. So I also want to draw your attention to the amount the government grants provided and the emissions that they can result in. So for something like Boundary Dam, which had a design capacity of 1 million tons a year reduction, at $240 million of a federal grant, that would result in support of almost 5 years of capture at a $50 a ton carbon price. So, this type of consideration was taken into account in our policy recommendations, which Alex will get into momentarily. Mandy, just one more slide. So basically, what are the challenges facing CCS investment in Canada? Investing in large-scale CCS projects improves 2 things. That quicker acceleration of the proven, reliable, and deployable technology to meet climate goals. This is a proven technology. It's been done. I mean, yes, we need to come up with new technologies to reduce costs. We need to always be doing R&D and looking to that, but not at the sacrifice of deployment as well. And so we need that quicker acceleration, and we need it now, because these projects can take up to 6 years to build, with all of the different engineering and design studies, et cetera. And we also need a retention and competitiveness. When you look at our friends from Carbon Engineering, they are taking a brilliant opportunity and capitalizing on the 45Q tax credit in the United States. And they have announced with Occidental Petroleum in Texas a 1 million ton capture. That was founded here in Canada, and it's picking up and going. And those types of competitiveness concerns are things that we need to readily be aware of. The carbon price as well can assist in the long run, but there's undoubtedly this gap, that's happening between the start of the project and 5 years down the road. How do you get over that hurdle? And it's presenting a real challenge to get investors involved. We talk in the report about the number of iterations that bring costs down and shared infrastructure bringing costs down. And these are all things that Canada actually has the ability to show its leadership role in. Alberta Carbon Trunk Line is already happening as like a CO2 highway with on and off ramps. There are infrastructure bank can be involved in those types of pipelines for shared infrastructure. Financiers in the investment community are also taking note of, these types of hubs and the value of reducing costs with the shared CO2 infrastructure. It's kind of a build it and they will come approach. Wolf Midstream with the ACTL pipeline is backed by the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board. They committed up to $305 million to Wolf to fund that project. That's good because we're getting out of just government handouts. We still need those government grants. They're going to be important. But what do we do for the next iterations? The first of kind projects see great government funding, but the next projects sometimes have a gap. And so, more iterations will also bring down those costs. So with that, I'm going to leave it there, turn it over to my friend Alex, who will talk a little bit more about our incentive options and why we should incent CCS in Canada, and I'll chime in around slide 14.
Thank you very much, Beth, for the intro. And hi, everyone. My name is Alex Kotsopoulos, and I lead our economics advisory practice at RSM and work closely with our global economics team to produce some of our economics thought leadership publications, including the Real Economy Canada. Let me start by explaining why we, RSM Canada, decided to partner with the International CCS Knowledge Center on this important study. As the leading provider of audit, tax, and consulting services to the middle market, we know that small and medium-sized businesses are very much the lifeblood and the beating heart of the Canadian economy. And that the deployment and development of CCS projects would generate significant economic benefits, and a large slice of those benefits would indeed flow to small and medium-sized businesses who have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And if I could maybe provide a couple of statistics just to show you, just to demonstrate how significant the impact has been. Let me delve into a couple of these statistics very quickly. So, major equity indices, which are more or less large corporations, have pretty much recovered all of their losses from earlier this year, and then some, frankly. But small businesses have yet to see such a bounce. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business reports that and this is data as of November 3rd, only 66% of small businesses have reopened, and that only 28% have recovered their pre-pandemic revenues. I think that's a pretty shocking number. It tells you the disparity we're seeing in our economy right now. And as an economist, I'm very concerned that many small and medium-sized businesses will frankly permanently close, which could impair Canada's economic recovery and frankly our longer-term economic prospects as well. And I think the construction of large-scale infrastructure projects like CCS, I think, will provide a needed boost to small and medium-sized businesses. So this is one of the key reasons we decided to partner with CCS Knowledge Center on this important project. And thank you, Beth, and to the rest of your team for the opportunity to do so. Before we talk about some of the policy options that we collectively came up with to help incentivize the deployment and development of large-scale CCS projects, I think it's important to ask the following fundamental question. Why should government and taxpayers, essentially taxpayers, help fund the deployment of large-scale CCS projects? So, and Beth talked a lot about this at the beginning, so I won't dwell in it. Of course, CCS we know is going to likely be a critical component of Canada achieving its climate change objectives. Second, economic growth and development, and locking in Canada's economic recovery. So I think it's important to talk about Canada's economic recovery given today's discussion. So I'm just going to take a few moments and delve into it a little bit. So, Canada's done relatively well to date, but considerable risk remains. So if we just look at the labor market, Canada has recovered approximately 21% of the jobs lost as a result of the pandemic. Canada's recovered all but 21% of the jobs lost as a result of the pandemic. And that compares quite favorably with the US. We've seen a strong bounce in retail sales, which have pretty much fully recovered. Housing starts remained remarkably strong pretty much throughout the pandemic. And we're expecting really strong growth rates to round out the years. For Q3, we're expecting a 45% annualized growth rate, GDP growth rate, and 3.9% for Q4. So that would be very strong growth rates to round out the year. There's no question that robust, decisive, comprehensive, and frankly, well-executed fiscal and monetary policy have been critical to Canada's strong economic recovery to date. However, it is also important to remember, and I think to note, that there are still over 600,000 individuals that have yet to recover a job. And as discussed earlier, previously, like many small and medium-sized businesses are facing some very significant challenges. And we are now in the midst of what appears to be a second wave that has necessitated the reimposition of lockdown measures across the country. So a lot of risk on the horizon, which frankly could potentially put some downside pressure on our Q4 forecasts. There has been some very positive news over the past couple of weeks in regards to the efficacy of vaccines. And one of the things that we're saying internally and talking a lot about is, no vaccine, no recovery. But it is unclear at this point when vaccines will ultimately be made available to the general public. And some of the reports I've read suggest that the vaccine will not be available until, at least to the general public, until sometime in 2022. And, and for these reasons, I strongly believe that a large-scale infrastructure project, which includes CCS, will be critical to Canada's economic recovery, and particularly in Western Canada, which was facing significant challenges even prior to the pandemic as a result of declining oil prices. And Beth, I just want to touch on one of the things that you said, and one of the things that we've been writing a lot about in some of our thought leadership is that it's not, in terms of prioritizing projects, it's really important that the infrastructure projects that we prioritize aren't just shovel ready, but shovel worthy. And I think CCS certainly hits that mark. So this brings me to sort of my third point, and it is something that I think that we're going to be hearing much more about as we enter the post-pandemic phase of the crisis: productivity. Canada, like other countries, is funding income support programs and other measures to tackle the virus by taking on more debt. The deficit for this year is projected to be $343 billion. This is an astronomical number. Even though Canada was in a relatively good fiscal position, this is still an extremely large deficit that will need to be extinguished at some point. And the only way to do that is really to either cut spending and or incent growth. And if Canada can increase capital investment, that could help reverse Canada's declining labor productivity growth and set the stage for stronger than otherwise longer-term economic growth. So in this regard, I think the development and deployment of CCS could substantially increase capital investment, help Canada build on its strengths in CCS to potentially help deploy CCS in other countries, and generate significant productivity benefits as a result. And lastly, Western Canada's economy, as I mentioned earlier, has been significantly impacted by declining oil prices, which started well in advance of the pandemic. And as Canada transitions to a lower carbon economy, we have to acknowledge that this transition is going to impose significant challenges on those regions that are carbon intense. The development and deployment of CCS in these regions can dramatically soften that impact of the transition to a lower carbon economy, and I think generate significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions as well. So I think there are several very good reasons for governments and ultimately taxpayers to incent the deployment of carbon capture and storage projects. Next slide, please. the fact of the matter is that governments around the world and agree, and they have acknowledged the important role of CCS and the social and economic and environmental benefits of carbon capture and storage, and have put in place a number of programs, regulatory frameworks, and other measures, including tax credits and other incentives, to spur the development and deployment of CCS projects. So as part of this study, we conducted a high-level jurisdictional review, and we looked at the relative strengths and weaknesses of some of the tax incentives and credits that we're seeing out there. And we focused our assessments, initial assessment, on production tax credits like 45Q and direct government grants. So if we focus in for a second on 45Q, in the US, the expanded 45Q tax credit, frankly, is regarded as a game changer and is one of the primary reasons for the significant increase in the CCS deployment outlook in the US. And from the perspective of incenting CCS investment, I think it's kind of difficult to underestimate the effectiveness of the 45Q tax credit. It provides a performance-based tax credit for CCS projects based on the amount of carbon dioxide, monoxide captured and stored, and is accordingly akin to a production tax credit. I think the biggest strength of the production tax credit in 45Q is that it is directly tied to the behavior governments want to incent, and that's the capture and storage of carbon. It has also been shown to be effective in the US, where CCS investment has increased substantially and is expected to continue to do so. On the flip side, production tax credits don't necessarily fully address some of the things that Beth was talking about earlier on, particularly the significant upfront capital costs and risks proponents bear in developing carbon capture and storage projects, which are, as many on the call today know, are extremely capital intense and involve large upfront outlays. And furthermore, we also wonder how a production tax credit like 45Q would be applied in Canada, which already has a carbon pricing regime at a federal level. Excuse me. So direct government grants can certainly be structured to address some of the front-end challenges that CCS projects face. And they can also provide government organizations an ability to identify projects that they feel yield the greatest bang for buck. But at the same time, these programs can be costly to administer and can become more political in nature, to say the least, and are potentially more likely to also crowd out private sector investment. So, as part of this study, we try to come up with various options that we felt could sort of address some of the challenges, and really address what we consider to be the key risk, and that is the front end nature of these projects, and also fit into Canada's broader sort of policy framework. Next slide, please. So the first option that we looked at is the refundable capital tax credit. This combines some of the benefits of a production tax credit and the grant program into one incentive. And this would, we think, competitively position Canada for CCS investments and help Canada bolster its leadership role in CCS. Capturing emissions at large emitting facilities, is really much the goal, but the economic burden of making that happen can be quite daunting. And until we have a sort of more iterations of CCS driving these costs down, we think that the sector is going to need some level of support to sort of make that happen. And providing a refundable credit for capital investment addresses many of the financial risk, or helps address many of the financial risks of deploying CCS at the source of emissions. So, because of the need to capture CO2 from large point sources, the option to create an incentive mechanism that can drive deployment at that capital intensive end of the project, is I I think we think a really strong and good approach for Canada, especially given that Canada already has a carbon pricing mechanism in place. So our report goes into greater detail, but generally the refundable tax credit, could be structured to essentially bring forward capital cost allowance deductions to the current period, and hence address the significant risk proponents have to contend with in the early phases of the CCS project. So we think this is certainly a very viable option that would position Canada well relative to competitors in the space. Next slide, please. Another approach, which sort of builds on the on option number one a little bit, is to focus the refundable tax credit at the very early stages of a CCS project. So upfront evaluation, feasibility, and front-end engineering and design studies and activities can require very substantial investment and time, and there's a high degree of uncertainty regarding whether it will pay off. In fact, many of these studies are really just an important part of that pathway to deploying CCS projects. And as you get more information about the project, the certainty for the investment and the business case for the investment improves. So CCS projects obviously require several technical milestones to ensure appropriate deployment, and each of these steps are based on levels of risk and varying levels of acceptance and approval. So the diagram on this slide shows this sort of project life cycle of a typical CCS project. And typical, I guess, is a bit in air quotations there. But nevertheless, the diagram shows that feasibility and front-end engineering studies can, of course, take a significant amount of time and, of course, investment. And the objective of providing a refundable tax credit at the engineering and design stage is to reduce that risk and uncertainty faced by CCS project proponents. And it could also, another benefit of this is that it can also potentially accelerate the evaluation and identification of viable CCS projects and potentially even support the development of a cluster of technical knowledge and expertise in CCS that could be an important part of Canada exporting its capabilities to other countries looking to deploy CCS. So that's option number two. The third option, if I can get you to move to the next slide, thank you. Yeah, is recreating the 45Q program in Canada. And as discussed earlier, 45Q, there's no question, has been effective in the U.S. But we have some concerns about how it would work in Canada, given that we already have a carbon pricing system, and more importantly, the 45Q program, while I will acknowledge it's been effective, does not fully address the significant risk faced by proponents at that front end of the project. And I think for these reasons, we prefer the refundable tax credit options, and we think that better fits the Canadian context as well too. One final thing that I'll say on this topic is that the intent of outlining some options was really to begin a conversation on what a CCS incentive program might look like in Canada. There could very well be other options, but I think whatever is put forward, I think it is vital that the incentive addresses the significant risk proponents face at the front end of the CCS project life cycle. And I think if we can really address that challenge, that would competitively position Canada to attract additional CCS investment and really build on our strengths, which government have already invested significantly. The last thing that we did on this study, if I could jump to the next slide very quickly.
I'm going to tune in. I can't even say it. Tune in for a second, Alex, and just jump in first. Okay. I want to just elaborate on what you're talking about front end and back end and the capital that's required. So to make these projects is quite a hefty task. A lot of the liability, especially when you're talking about carbon taxes and carbon prices, is on those emitters and those large emitters to reduce the emissions. And the way that, for instance, in Alberta with the TIER program, the way that it works is, we provide this example in the report. So if company A is attempting to reduce its emissions, over 400,000 tons, up to 700,000 tons or more, they build a capture facility And that actually increases their emissions intensity, because in order to capture, you have to generate more energy. So they actually, you know, could potentially go above a baseline that the government has set for them for the place that they have to get to. And so if they go above that baseline, they may actually have to pay compliance, even though they're the company that's capturing everything. You know, it's something like Capital Power, Lehigh, we're seeing these as concerns, you know, and when they capture that CO2, you know, they could capture 700,000 tons of CO2 and sell it to, you know, with transportation to an oil field or to storage to Company B. And Company B then, because they are permanently storing it, they take on the liability of the long-term storage, they're having the permanent sequestration of it, they get the credit in the program. And so if that credit is $50 a ton, maybe they make a commercial agreement to make sure Company A ends up actually receiving some of that credit back. But right from the start, the company that's taking the initiative, taking that capital risk, building all of this, you know, really, they're the ones reducing the emission. They're not getting the credit. And so that's why the same thing with 45Q ends up being true, because that back end type incentive requires the negotiation of a commercial agreement, and the person doing the actual capturing is at a disadvantage in the negotiations. I'm a lawyer, so I think about you know, what you're trying to willing to give. With the Boundary Dam project and the negotiations with Cenovus, which is now Whitecap, I mean, there was no carbon price. It's an inherent carbon price for just the simple sale of CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. That wasn't a consideration. But as these types of regulatory schemes and carbon pricing and stuff are starting to build, that uncertainty as to who will get credits or where that will all stem from is something that I think large-scale emitters are looking at as large-scale problems. And I think that 45Q, you know, while in the States that is a cash grant that can be divided over, there's still concerns about who can get the money and what their actual production is, or what they're actually making when they're capturing the CO2. Because if the enhanced oil recovery is making something, that's the product. And so where are you generating the new income from your capture? You're probably not. You're just continuing to supply power, or maybe you're even supplying a little less power because there's a little bit of an energy penalty there when you're capturing. So that's something I just wanted to add to what Alex was saying. Mandy, can you go to the next slide? And then after I say a couple more things, I'm gonna hand it right back to Alex, conscious of our time and wanting to get some questions in. So there was a question that came from the audience about labor, and I wanted to address that right away. So basically, I wanted to let you know that the construction of the Boundary Dam CCS facility actually required an unprecedented coordination of resources and expertise. It utilized more than 60 contracted companies and employed about 1,700 contractors and SAS Power employees who worked around the clock for a total of nearly 5 million man hours with no lost time injuries, which SAS Power really likes to talk about that, because I think that's really important. You know, as the construction of the Boundary Dam facility shows, these projects are capital intensive, and while the cost to develop these projects will decrease through those iterations and shared infrastructure opportunities like I spoke about, they still require significant outlays upfront. And, you know, even the maintenance and shutdowns and progress to complete these construction projects for CCS spur job creation. So for instance, during a scheduled November, I think it was 2019, maintenance shutdown for the Northwest Redwater Partnership, the Sturgeon Refinery, part of the ACTL, they actually saw over 390,000 hours of employment, you know, coming from those highly skilled trades, you know, an essential backbone to large-scale CCS project, pipe fitters, boiler makers, scaffolders, unions, all of those things are really important, and those jobs are part of economic stimulus. So, you know, you can look at our report to hear more about how many CCS projects around the world we need and the amount of jobs that can create, and even in the United States, what 45Q is looking at generating. But I'll turn it over to Alex to show what our calculations in our report show for economic.
Thanks, Beth. Next slide, please. So, you know, last thing that we did on this on this project was, we assessed some of the economic impacts of the development and deployment of large-scale CCS projects. And the intent of this section in the report and this analysis was really to provide policymakers and interested parties just an order of magnitude of what the development of CCS projects could mean in terms of economic metrics like GDP and jobs. And we know those are two very important metrics. And we found that the initial construction and development of CCS projects alone could generate very significant economic impacts. And so, over 4 years, we estimate that simply the development and construction of 3 large-scale CCS projects could generate $2.7 billion in incremental economic activity, that's incremental GDP, and generate and support over 6,000 jobs in Canada. Taking into consideration downstream multiplier effects. So, I should note that a large number of these jobs and the associated economic activity would likely flow to the regions that host these projects. But I should also note that all parts of Canada would benefit from the economically from the development of these projects. Our analysis also very much suggests that given current levels of unemployment in Western Canada, which was increasing in many parts prior to the pandemic, that a large degree of these economic impacts would indeed be incremental. In other words, it is unlikely that the development of CCS projects would take resources from other sectors, given where unemployment rate, given slack in the economy right now. And I think finally, the last thing that I'll say is important to note that the economic impacts that we estimated as part of this report really only take into consideration the upfront construction and development of CCS projects. The ongoing operating impacts and upstream impacts were not considered, and certainly at least quantitatively. And I think we should also not lose sight of the potential for productivity benefits to the oil and gas sector, like Beth had mentioned earlier, and to other sectors of the Canadian economy. So the long and short of it is, and just to summarize, and we'll jump to questions right after this, the development of CCS projects very much could generate very significant economic benefits, and I think play an important role in helping Canada achieve its GHG emissions target reductions, and also play an important role in locking in Canada's economic recovery and helping Canada build back better. So I'll stop there. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I think we have a few minutes for Q&A right now.
Thank you, Beth and Alex. Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the queue here. Beth, maybe you want to take a stab at this one, and Alex, jump in if you have something to add to. So this one is this is from Yuho, and Beth and Alex, where is the balance between federal and provincial in Canada? How much should CCS policy support come from the federal government, and what is the role for provinces?
When we were doing this report, Alex and I had a lot of discussions about this exact question, and we decided to do our focus on federal tax. One of the things that is interesting is that coming from Saskatchewan with the background of a Crown Corporation project, they actually don't pay federal tax and wouldn't benefit from a program like this. So that was something we actually took into consideration. Alex really woke my eyes up to the fact that during this time with economic stimulus and COVID relief, we really are seeing the provinces try and give a lot of community support and small business support and those types of things as well. And maybe Alex is best suited to talk about that. But in terms of support from provinces and the federal government on CCS specifically, I 100% think that both are needed, but in terms of a tax incentive, that may be best suited to a federal approach.
Yeah, Beth, I would tend to agree with you on that point. Definitely, I think the focus should be on federal. The other reason I would suggest as well too is many of the provinces who are dealing basically with the COVID crisis, sort of at on the ground level, are currently facing some very substantial fiscal challenges, and much more so than the federal government. So From a fiscal room perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense for the feds to take this on. And secondly, that doesn't mean that certain provinces can't add a tack on top, but I certainly think that the feds need to play a leadership role here.
Great. There are a number of questions in the queue here, so we'll try to get to a couple of more. Alex, can you talk about some of the key assumptions and limitations regarding economic impact estimates?
Yeah. So, I mean, thanks, Jody, for the question. This is, I think, an important question because, as I mentioned earlier, yes, the economic impact. When we do economic impact assessments, we adhere to the principle of conservatism. So we tend to be, we always tend to err on the side of caution. And if we can't quantify the impact, then we will sort of deal with it qualitatively. So, I would consider the economic impact estimates that we estimated as part of this assessment to be highly conservative. We're only focusing on the upfront construction and development. We're not looking at the longer term impacts, and we're certainly not looking at some of the productivity benefits that could result, like increased utilization of enhanced oil recovery. We're also not looking at the potential benefits that could result from climate change mitigation in a direct way either. So, the estimates, I think, are largely conservative, and they're kind of they're that way by design. I should mention that we did, as part of certainly this was a high level assessment, and we looked at a hypothetical situation where 3 larger scale projects were deployed, and we made some assumptions regarding what the cost of that might be, and our report goes into a little bit greater detail on some of those assumptions. But I think the key message for everyone listening in on the presentation is that these are very much conservative numbers.
Great, thank you for that. I notice a number of questions coming in related to 45Q, and it's just maybe a little bit of clarification, understanding there. So maybe just Beth, and then backed up again by Alex, just relative benefits, tax credits versus a 45Q type program in Canada.
Yeah, and this is kind of what we were really trying to show. I mean, there's a lot of push in Canada for 45Q, right? We're seeing Globe and Mail articles. There's a lot of, the Public Policy Forum has gotten on board, and we're very encouraged to see people paying so much attention to CCS, to be frank. In the 5 years since our inception with the Knowledge Center, we are really seeing an uptick in CCS interest, especially in Canada, globally as well, with these net zero commitments, et cetera, the role for aviation, all those types of things. Hydrogen is coming on board, direct air capture, all of these things. But, that incentive that the US has spurred about, almost 30 projects. That's why Canada and Canadians are starting to say, well, why don't we do the same as them? We want what they have. But we're very different systems. And that's why we partnered with the accounting firm to try and bring light to that. And RSM, I think, has done a great job in the report to explain why we aren't canceling out a recreation of 45Q for Canada. That is still our option 3. But what we think would be maybe better for Canada is to use the systems that are currently in place. We've seen enhanced classes and capital credits before. This is an easy transition, and Alex can talk about how Canada has, tended to use capital tax credits in the past as opposed to using production tax credits.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Beth. I think, in Canada, certainly a program like 45Q, we're not aware of something that aligns to it. And I think the important point to make here is that Canada already has a carbon pricing system in place. And so the question now becomes, so you're going to add 45Q on top of that. I think that creates some challenges. The reason why I think a capital tax credit might be a bit better than a 45Q tax credit, production tax credit, is that it really helps address the front end challenges that and can target the developer of these projects. And that's That's what I think is one of the biggest challenges to addressing some of the, or to helping incent increase CCS projects in Canada.
And maybe I'll just add to that, that's also what we're hearing from our stakeholders. So that's what we're actually hearing from the large emitters. A lot of them are saying, well, we want a tax credit like the US because of competitiveness concerns. But when you actually speak and have that one-on-one conversation, the issues are about how are we going to get across the line? What are we going to do to tie us over for the first 4 to 5 years? How are we going to get there? And government grants would be great, but are those sustainable? This is actually a refundable tax credit that you just get in advance. So it's money that you'll be realizing at the end anyway, and you get that to kickstart you and roll you out. And I think that that's also, crucial here.
Thank you, Alex and Beth. There's a stream of questions coming in now, and apologies to everybody for us not being able to get to them. We will try to answer them and have them on our landing page as a follow-up. But we want to commit to finishing within the hour here, which we had set this for. So Alex and Beth, any last minute remarks you want to make, and we'll wrap up.
Sure, I'm really happy for everybody to have joined. The turnout was great. We're going to be sending out a recording of this as well to to people, because I know some people couldn't come at the time but still wanted to get the recording of the webinar. Yuho came on at the end again and asked another question about hotspots and ACTL. Obviously, we want to expand that more in Canada, and a tax credit would incent more projects to use that shared infrastructure more readily.
Yeah, and I'll just say thank you very much for having me here today, and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Great, thank you. So everybody, you can access the report, download it from our website, ccsknowledge.com, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Take good care.